Why do you have to look like a round peg in order to fit in schools? Shouldn't our bubble be moldable to whatever shapes that's coming into our school? But the English I needed, especially around reading and writing, to cope with primary school was much, much harder. It wasn't something you could just gradually immerse yourself into. Speaking and listening is not a problem, but academic English is another thing. So you need to probably invest in that a little bit. Intercultural and cultural diversity for me is more reflective of my feeling as a student throughout school. So I always felt there was an implicit pressure as someone that has come from overseas that I had to fit in.
Beautiful and traumatic way you have been in a place to acknowledge this gap. It was traumatic for you, but this has informed everything. And life has brought you, not life accidentally or luckily, you were doing the work.
They are very aware that the society is no longer monocultural. However, they don't know what to do about it. The future that I see is that it's normalized to have a range of backgrounds in representing leadership. Be the leader and advocate for yourself as who you are.
Welcome to EDU Leaders Speak, the podcast where trailblazers in education share their insights and innovations. Here, we delve into the heart of teaching and learning, exploring how today's educators can inspire, empower, and transform. Today, my guest is my dear friend, Stanley Wang. Stanley is a Taiwanese-Australian educator based in Melbourne, in Australia. Throughout his education career, he has worked as a Chinese language teacher, a head of department, a non-profit executive, and a school principal. His particular interests are language education, bilingual education, intercultural capabilities, and cultural diversity in schools. Stan, thank you so much for accepting the invitation. I'm so honored to have you here today.
No, at all. I'm very excited to talk about, topics that we all have a passion in. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with me. And I'm so inspired. We have met so many times, face-to-face, in person, in Finland, yes. And online after that, because we felt this deep educational connection that all educators have when they have the same passion and the same love. Tell us, your origin story is so interesting for me. What can you share from it?
So I am Taiwanese by origin. I was born in Taiwan, grew up in Taiwan. And a quick version of the story is when I was 8, I had an opportunity to spend my summer holidays in Australia with my aunt. However, both my aunt and my uncle were working, so they were too busy to take care of me during the day. So the arrangement they made with my parents is I will go to the local primary school. And so as an 8-year-old boy without English, I was dumped into the local primary school for 4 weeks. And I guess I've spent the rest of my education career in Australia trying to figure out what was it that was so captivating that after the 4 weeks, I went back to Taiwan and spent a year convincing my parents to let me move to Australia. And so when I was 9, my mother gave up from all the nagging and said to me that if you like, you can go, but we are not moving. And so I went back to my aunt's place and began, a journey, my academic journey as a little international student at the age of 9. And my mother's plan was that I will give up in a couple of months, because being in an environment like that for a holiday when you know it's temporary with a bit of fun and having academic pressures and wanting to achieve, it's different. So she thought I will be putting so much pressure on myself that sooner or later I will say to her, let me go back to Taiwan. And of course, now 26 years later, I am still in Melbourne. So that's actually the journey. There was a particular experience interculturally, cross-linguistically, that really inspired the young Stanley. And I have always known, probably as a calling on the inside, that I enjoyed working with people and seeing them grow as a result of what I do, which naturally led herself into a career in teaching. So I think combining that personal experience, being a young international student, to eventually wanting to contribute to this industry, yeah, the story links up that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I guess I know I would never allow my kid to go to another country at night.
Yeah, so maybe you can do a podcast interview with my mother. She had some bold parenting for a mother in the 90s.
That was really bold and brave. Yeah, yeah. I guess she knew. Not that you would go back, but you would gain so much from it that it would be a wonderful experience for you, whatever the case, whether you went back or not. I think inside she knew that it would work for you in a way she couldn't understand, of course. I don't think she could understand you. I don't think mother can understand a 9-year-old who's saying the country.
Yeah, but having said that, I do think her parenting philosophy, or one of the features of her parenting philosophy, was always around training me to be independent. And that was very clear from a young age, as young as 4 or 5, I will be the one that goes to the local grocery shop to buy something for her. She was very happy for me to go to the playground, decide how long I was going to be there by myself. So there was a lot of things in day-to-day life where it was clear that she wanted me to be independent, and I thrived on being independent. I actually enjoyed setting off on my own adventures, however small, it was. And because my mother was a housewife, I spent a lot of time with her. And so when I think back to those things that are clearly important and have guided my life, her values and what she advocated for are very, I can articulate quite well.
Yeah, that's a beautiful lesson we can all parents and educators can pick from this, from your mom. Because these parents, tiger parents, helicopter parents, are doing the opposite, and then they're wondering why their systems don't work. It's because it's their system, right? And they don't work for others. So beautiful learning from your mom. I would definitely like to meet her.
You will need some Mandarin lessons, I assume.
Yeah, amazing. So how has this journey impacted your career and what you were looking after?
Sure. I actually, in retrospect, this journey has informed very much everything I do these days. So to give you an example, when I introduce myself to other people who know something about education, I typically would say that I entered the career as a Chinese language teacher. However, there's a story to that. The story was, at the time, I was one of the very few non-English speaking children in my primary school. So maybe once or twice a week, they took us out of an English lesson. And I remember there were 3 of us, and we would sit on the floor in the carpeted room, and we would play some games just to learn the very basics, even catching up on words like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or even January, February, March, because we were really zero in terms of our levels. But across the board, I think Australia was quite advanced in teaching English as a second language to adults. We had great systems to help migrants settle. But in schools, it was seen as, well, they're young enough. They will just immerse and they will catch up naturally. And for me, there's an element of truth that, of course, being in the environment, my spoken English caught up very quickly. But the English I needed, especially around reading and writing, to cope with primary school, even writing a diary entry, telling a story, or eventually reading about history and other subjects, was much, much harder. It wasn't something you could just gradually immerse yourself into. Actually, having some scaffolder support was really important. And so my mother actually, from very early on, arranged for an English language tutor to sit with me probably once a week for 2 hours, just to give me more exposure to the reading and writing. And she learned that from the experiences of other migrants whose parents have said, speaking and listening is not a problem, but academic English is another thing. So you need to probably invest in that a little bit. Now, that journey meant that throughout school, in Taiwan, I was a really confident student, getting high 90s for all of my subjects. But in Australia, it was often the English that stopped me from understanding other subject areas. And so I knew I was catching up day by day, but it was quite traumatic to some extent when you feel like the teachers were completely unaware how to help you. And so at school, especially through our secondary schools, my favorite subjects were Japanese and French, because in those subjects, I was at the same level playing field with all of my classmates. Everyone was new to that language. And also, I think I did really well in those subjects because I had already had some experience learning another language, however traumatic English was, whereas my classmates had no idea how to learn a second language. So the curriculum for Japanese and French were very slow. And, you know, of course, when you do well in a subject, you grow to like it even more. And I also had fantastic teachers. And so by the end of high school, it was clear that there was something about languages that I really, truly loved. And so I continued into university and decided eventually that as my first job, proper full-time job, I would want to be a language teacher. And so sometimes, sure, now in retrospect, they all line up, these stories. But it's not the case that I had envisaged that I was becoming a language teacher when I was 9, you know, and sometimes it's out of trauma that you find new opportunities as well. And so apart from the languages education, and I think from there, why I also talk about bilingual education and advocate for it a lot is because being in an English-speaking country, often people don't feel like there's a need to learn another language other than English. And even if they do, in the Australian context, where the government promotes Asian languages, you know, as being important for trade and also our societal cohesion, the Asian languages are very different to English. So the kind of hours we give to kids to do that is actually not enough. So the best solution to actually encouraging students to learn it well and see it as part of authentic context and, you know, the Australian life is through bilingual education, where we could try and immerse them, give them enough contact hours, not teach it for the language's sake, but use the language to learn about other things. And that's why languages bilingual have that story to it. On the other hand, intercultural and cultural diversity for me is more reflective of my feeling as a student throughout school. So I always felt there was an implicit pressure as someone that has come from overseas that I had to fit in. But at the same time, the school was teaching us a mindset and and there was a discourse around Australia being multicultural. It prides itself on being an immigrant country where people bring in different cultures, perspectives. But there was a tension, right? As a child, we were being told how wonderful it is that we're all from different parts of the world and we all bring something. Yet it was very clear the way school was run only fit the majority. There was an expectation that everyone had to have the same kind of lunch, for example. It was clear that there wasn't a place to really use your home language at school in other ways. I'm not saying teaching the classes in Chinese, but sometimes there was the pressure that if I had spoken my home language to another child who was from the same background, the attitude or the responses I get from other people or how they looked at me made me feel like there was no place for my other identity. And I think even though there is never explicit racism that I've experienced in Australian schools, that journey did make me really question, how do I be like them? Or do I need to leave another side of me at home and only show one side of myself at school? And that's not healthy for any teenager when their identity is still in formation and transforming day by day. And so often I feel like the point of being a language educator in Australia is not so much that our students eventually will become great, fluent Chinese or Japanese speakers. They often don't get there. But it's the fact that this experience teaches the mainstream, often monocultural mainstream, to appreciate another perspective and be able to empathize with the experiences of all the other migrants who now make up 51% of our society. You know, our latest statistics show that by definition, 51% of Australians are first generation or second generation migrants. And that means they still have a strong connection to somewhere overseas. And so for me, that's where intercultural comes in, because it may not be that they speak fluent Chinese, but by exploring this language and seeing all the different ways the language is set up for the Chinese culture, they are challenged to, their assumptions are challenged. Sometimes their prejudices are challenged. And so that's why I guess when I introduce myself and what I do these days, I use these four keywords. There's the languages education, and I love learning languages. There is the bilingual, there is the intercultural, and there is the cultural diversity piece.
Wow, I love these four pillars and the distinction you make, because lots of people stay on the academic part of the language, and then they say, this is my role, just to give them the academic part of the language. And when you skip the other three pillars, then the language, the academic part doesn't work, and they don't know why it doesn't work. And it's a beautiful beautiful and traumatic way you have been in a place to acknowledge this gap. It was traumatic for you, but this has informed everything you're doing.
Yeah, look, I am probably using the word traumatic too lightly. A lot of my reflections have come from a more critical lens when I grew up and entered the society and realized that schools try very hard to be a safe place. So there are certain ways schools message to children in hope that these values that they are surrounded by can eventually take them into a better world, right? And that they could become the leaders of these almost utopian values in the future. But of course, there's this massive transition. There is the world that I've been told that any culture is welcome, and especially at that time when Australia it was quite easy to become a citizen. So within 2 to 3 years, we were Australian citizens as well. We were there to stay. I think it's quite different if, in today's world, there is education for commercialization. You are here to study for a few years, get your degree. Whether you stay or not, we don't know. You're not part of Australian society as such. We just sold you a product. There is that. Then there is, we're migrants to this country. We're here to stay. We make up the social fabrics of this society. So to some extent, we have the right to citizenship and active participation like anyone who has come before us. And unless you were Indigenous Australians, everyone is a migrant in this country. It's just a matter of when. And so I think for me, I fit in this middle category. I wasn't here to buy an educational service. I was here to become part of Australia. So when I did enter the real Australian society, I realized, wow, there is a gap between what school taught me and how well I'm actually accepted. Now, maybe I am happy to be the sacrificial lamb in a generation where we are still learning to embrace diversity in the workforce and workplaces. But now that I'm a teacher for the next generation, I don't want them to grow up and then have that same questions as I did. Is this school sell me something that actually doesn't exist? And they're the questions I'm asking at the moment, I guess.
And you are the right person to have this unique point of view. And life has brought you, not life accidentally or luckily, you were doing the work. I know that for sure. And now you are positioned in a very good position to make decisions. How able are you? Are the schools better informed now? And how able are you to move them into another direction that you see as a solution?
I think schools are very much informed and aware. They're very aware that the children in front of us come from a range of backgrounds and often mixed. Sometimes you can't even label them. You can't even say we have 3 Greek children here and 3 Taiwanese children there. Sometimes it's intermarriages, sometimes it's 1.5 gen, second gen, etc. They are very aware that the society is no longer monocultural. However, they don't know what to do about it. And so I think this is where I have a role. My role is not necessarily to do the job for them, because I think with advocacy work for any minority rights or minority groups, it only works if the majority sees the importance of it and the majority stands for this issue and is willing to be the leader of it. Like, I'll give you an example. I think in Australia, there are, because we're so diverse, there's also a huge range of minority groups that are in the same way coming out of some sort of suppression and traumatic experiences now wanting equity. That could be the reconciliation Indigenous Australians are advocating for. It could even be women's right in leadership. It could be like what I do, which is around building cultural diversity awareness, intercultural capabilities in schools. And we have some shocking figures, I'll be very honest with you. In the case of, there's a group that I know very well that advocates for Asian Australians, Asian generally, Pan-Asian. And they say that their latest data shows that Australia has maybe a quarter of Australians will be considered Asian. But if you look at CEO style C-level positions, Asians don't make up less than 3%. Now, if we are let's say if Asians were new to the country and you've just arrived, even if you're arrived en masses, it will take time. You have to get to know the society. The society needs to get to know you. So I'm not expecting a newly arrived group in Australia to be integrated equitably and holistically. It's not utopia. However, Asian people have been around since the 70s. So it's been 50-something years. Now, often we're talking third, fourth generation Asian families now. If you tell me that 3% and 25% are matching up, then I will really put a question mark on that. And I think with any group that's asking these difficult questions, who we're really trying to inspire are the people who are currently privileged, that are currently empowered. So my school is a really great example. The school I currently work in really normalizes women in leadership. Now, teaching is specifically, a particular industry where you tend to have more women than men. But rarely in leadership do you see that ratio being reflected. And so we are one of those schools where there's always been a focus on merit and also you bringing in something the current leader doesn't have. Like, our leader is fantastic at not choosing people who are like-minded. He chooses people who complements him because he's very aware of where his weaknesses are. And so as a result, he's a fantastic leader. So as a result, we have a really diverse team. And, at one stage, I think almost 80% of our leadership positions went to women. Now, I actually think that's probably higher than the ratio of women to men at our school as staff members. But I'm really proud of the fact that our principal, who is a white Anglo, middle-aged man, the typical profile that's now not very liked in Australia, he's the one that's supported women in leadership. And some people questioned, shouldn't it be half-half, or shouldn't it be by the ratio of what our actual profile is? Why is it now 80% of the people are women, the leaders are women? And of course, for him, it's about the team, what skills these people bring in, and the merit of your own experience. What are you going to bring to the team? And so he was always able to answer that question. But for me, if you then look back the last 15 years under his leadership, maybe there was also a deliberate effort to some extent to start challenging the notion of only male in leadership, even if it's overcompensated, even if people are saying, oh, that's tokenistic. I think if you don't have an initial phase of overcompensated tokenism, then how do you get the momentum started? So there have been times in Australia when I do this work that I feel like I'm invited to talk at this panel, or I'm invited to talk at that forum, even though my experience as a principal was still quite limited. And I often felt like I'm very willing to share and I've got something to say, but have I only been invited here because I am one of so few non-white Anglo educational leaders in this industry, and it's good branding for them to have diversity. So on the inside, I do ask that question. And you have people like me that make two choices. They will say, no, I refuse to be a token. Or you have people like me that says, as long as you give me an opportunity to have my voices heard, even if I'm a bit of a token or I am half a token, I don't mind. Because if there is no visibility of people like me in leadership, then I can never get any momentum started.
Exactly.
And so I actually embrace those opportunities to be a token sometimes, because I want the next generation to feel that regardless of your background, education is a collective responsibility of our generation. You may not be the one that becomes a teacher, but collectively, we are responsible for the kind of people that this society will claim to be leaders in 30 years' time, for example. And so I often think in Australia, it's important to talk both about the pull and the push factors. Yes, there is a systemic racism problem, clearly. It's not explicit, but it's systematic, it's implicit. It's not just in education, it's in finance, it's in a whole range of industries. But that's not the only reason why this is an issue. How many immigrant families have come to Australia for a better life, have wanted their children to have better education? How many families have supported their children to become teachers? I give you the stereotypical profile of Chinese or Korean, general Asian families and Indian families. Every child throughout school says, my parents want me to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, an accountant. I've rarely heard a child says they want me to be a teacher. So to some extent, we as immigrants as well have to be responsible for the lack of role models in this society. Now, these days we have a few more, but even then, how many people make it into leadership and can have a voice that hopefully is representative of a different perspective? And I feel to some extent that's the symbolic and the actual impact I am having in the industry.
Yes, and I love it's really powerful, this higher discernment you have, that I'm going to do this because I have this unique point of view. I'm going to play this role of opening the space, turning on the lights for other people, although some people might just invite me just for the image of the conference or as you mentioned. And I love this because it shows that you have really high levels of emotional intelligence and this higher discernment that I know where I'm heading to. It's not to show off, it's not to impress, it's to show up for my people, for myself, right? First, it might sound selfish, but it's for yourself, so that if you prove it to yourself, then the other people just follow and say, "Oh, this is a great role model for me."
Yeah, absolutely. And so even my boss, my principal, he's very supportive of my philosophy and what I want to do. But him and I both agree that this kind of societal level advocacy work, for it to be meaningful and for it to, because ultimately it's not about me holding a poster or going on to protest, right? The future that I see, the more beautiful future I see is that it's normalized to have a range of backgrounds in representing leadership, right? And if that does happen, people don't even need to talk about it. People don't even need to question it. So the beauty of my new future, is that people don't even have this conversation with me anymore because it's so normal, right? That I work myself out of a job. and so that's the meaningful impact as opposed to the visibility impact. And so we often talk about probably the best way to do that is to nudge, right? It's not a project. I don't need a Gantt chart that says where everything is going to, who are my stakeholders and how I'm going to strategically target them or have conversations. Actually, it's not. You live in the society with them. You live in this team like a valuable member, but you softly ask questions. You bring a curious perspective to it. I'll give you one simple example. There's a significant proportion of young Australians who are Muslim. And unfortunately, Eid is not a recognized holiday in our calendar. Our calendar predominantly Christian faith-based public holidays. But Eid is very important for these Muslim families. And so in the past, some of them will choose to take a day off to celebrate. And the schools generally will talk to those parents about, is it possible to still attend the school, but also, for example, come late after you've gone to the mosque, or try and negotiate something. They're also aware that the month before Eid, the students would have been fasting throughout the day. So it's important to know that, they may feel dehydrated, especially if it's Australian summer when Ramadan happens, then maybe they don't feel comfortable participating in PE because they might actually, be too dehydrated, etc. And a beautiful moment happened at our school this year during the assembly, where our British head of school, during assembly, openly acknowledged that this is a really important time for a significant proportion of our students, and we really wish that you will have a great Ramadan, and that you will gain the learnings and reflections that your religion teaches you through this exercise. And I thought that was one of the most sincere, but also educational moments in the way Australian leaders have approached Ramadan, because what I have traditionally seen is there will be a leader that says something about, oh, happy Ramadan kind of thing. But then it's typically an email to the teachers that say, please be careful. Some of our kids will be very hungry and dehydrated. So please make sure that they're not fainting in schools, or you check in with them, as if Ramadan is a well-being issue. I think there are two very different types of acknowledgement, right? So that's what I mean. Australia is aware. They're very aware. They just don't know what to do. And sometimes as an outsider, I don't know, the outsider is the wrong word. Sometimes as an intercultural kind of observer from the third party, I look at it and I thought, is that the right message to be sending to non-Muslim kids about Ramadan, that it's a physical and well-being challenge?
Yeah.
And this year at our school, we had a moment where it was International Women's Day at the same time as Ramadan. And so one of our girls' school leaders decided for lunchtime they will put on some events to celebrate women and women's contributions. And so they had various activities. There was a little barbecue, and then there was a music stand, and then a music area for people can dance as well. And then there was beach volleyball. And I just remember in that meeting, and I said, well, it's great that we have a lunchtime and there are kids-friendly activities, and they are pitched at that age group, and they're all wearing purple for the day. And I think that they get the message while having fun. Completely support the idea. However, this is also Ramadan. Now, if I was a Muslim girl and I looked at a barbecue where probably not going to have halal meat, or there's pork involved, or pork is being used on the same grill, that's out for me. Music is traditionally not really seen as a positive thing for your religious practice, especially during Ramadan. So they're not going to be dancing and enjoying the music from a religious perspective. So rule that one out. Beach volleyball, probably stereotypically considered not so conservative with what you're wearing and that kind of thing. Now rule that out. So what are our Muslim kids going to be choosing at this great festival that you've designed to celebrate women? Actually, your slogan is time for inclusion, but your activities are just as exclusive.
Yeah. And
so it's those moments when I don't criticize, but I might suggest,
yes,
why don't you add something to the menu? I often use the vegan example in restaurants as a parallel comparison. A vegan that walks into a non-vegan restaurant is probably not going to expect that every item is vegan, but they are probably going to expect that they have at least 1 to 2 choices. And I think that's something schools can do easily. I mean, if you're already putting on multiple activities, and a Muslim child in Australian schools is not expecting that everyone is going to be praying with them during lunchtime, but you can at least offer one activity where they can also participate and reinforce the message of solidarity for women. And so, for example, they end up doing a handprint. There was a handprint activity that will eventually form into a picture or a symbol for the event, which is something that is much more inclusive from that perspective. Now, for those moments, that's what the nudging does. It's a soft reminder. It's not a criticism of the staff, but I've just added a new perspective really softly and said, oh, how about we also do these other activities so no one is missing out? And I think it starts with small things like this because people don't know what they don't know.
Exactly. And this confirms once again that you were positioned in the right place at the right time. And the people who positioned you there, who chose you, knew instinctively, I don't know, that you would turn on the lights on this, what they were not seeing, what they didn't know.
And I think that's why cultural diversity is so important. It's not because every year when we run Ramadan, we can now tick the box and say we've done it right. It's not. It's just I can bring a different perspective that is sometimes unconventional from the dominant group's eyes, maybe.
And it's something that you only see because you have experienced on a certain level.
Yeah, absolutely.
These challenges, and you saw the opportunity out of these challenges. Now that's why you're positioned there, and you're able to pass on this message to everybody else. And I love watching your journey and seeing all these breakthroughs you have throughout this journey and the breakthroughs you bring to other people as well. And what is one tip you would give to a migrant family for their kid? If they're watching us, we have migrants in Greece, you have migrants in Australia.
Yeah.
What is one tip you would give? Like, what is a trap that their kid might fall into because they're scared or they feel traumatized, and they might stay in that trap for a lot of years,
a long time. Yeah, absolutely.
How can they see the opportunity in this struggle and challenge?
Yeah. Look, I think migration and new arrivals is now something almost every country is experiencing. So I think I am proud to be living in a country where, because it's such a critical mass now, we've been asking these questions, but asking these questions doesn't mean we have the answers. It's taken us a long time. Sure. And so if there was a piece of advice for kids who are navigating this challenge in a country that hasn't even started asking these questions, I think it would be to be the leader and advocate for yourself as who you are, even at their age.
Yes.
And I think the fact that we're having a conversation today after maybe 10 years of my own work in this area and reflections is in a way a little bit inefficient because I am already at my age. And maybe for a lot of countries that are welcoming new immigrants in, you don't have another 20, 30 years before this boils into some other unwanted social problems as well. And so I actually think for if the piece of advice I will give is maybe I use an anecdote from myself. After about 9 months in the Australian schools, after my mother let me come, she used to make me write a letter to her every week. That was her way of ensuring that my reading and writing in Chinese didn't stop or didn't go backwards. And so one of the things I kept talking about is I want to dye my hair blonde. Because I thought...
Powerful mama say.
Because I didn't fit in otherwise. No one else looked like me. And the popular kids, out of all the typical hair colors of Europeans, the darker ones, I thought it was not that different to what I have. And it always seems like the kids with the lighter color hair are more popular. So I wanted that hair color. And, so my mother had a conversation, lots of conversations with me about this because I was quite insistent. And really challenged me to question my own logic. Now, is dyeing your hair this color going to make your English better? Probably not. Is it going to actually change your skin color? And so that people suddenly think you're white Anglo as well? But you can see the impact this has on me as a 9-year-old, that clearly I don't fit, and I had a strong desire to fit because at the school, what considered fitting was that particular model.
Yes.
And so my challenge to educators and children in this next generation is, why do you have to look like a round peg in order to fit in schools? Shouldn't schools be like Play-Doh, the clay? Shouldn't our bubble be moldable to whatever shapes that's coming into our school? Yeah. Now, I knew at the age of 9, I will be spending almost more time in Australia in the future than I will be in Taiwan. So my block, if you like, or shape is not going to be round or square. I'm going to be some sort of combination of the two. Now, if I remained 100% the square, the Taiwanese square, that's not helpful either. Then I might as well have stayed in Taiwan. Yeah. But I am going to be this polygon exactly. of whatever this interesting shape. And I think to encourage kids to just embrace that, but to also ask the questions at school. For example, I used to feel quite embarrassed about, I used to feel like there was no place where I can share the music I was listening to. Now, I knew what the white English students were listening to, because on the school buses, that's what the radio played all the time. However, I was into my Chinese and Mandarin pop music, which has a huge market in the world, just that Australians didn't know about it. So I didn't feel like it was a niche thing. In fact, it was there were some other Asian children who knew about the artists that I liked, but we also felt like we couldn't talk about it at school. Or like when, you used to have the Walkman and I have a little CD album, while other kids were always sharing what CD they had, I would try and avoid those conversations because I felt like the school didn't really welcome other music. When we have social events, I'm never going to hear music of another culture. It's always what was popular for the majority, if you like. But why not? I mean, like, Australia's changed so much. Only 2 weeks ago, I was invited to a lunchtime event at my school as a judge for multilingual karaoke. Like, we had 14 performances by our students in Chinese, Japanese, Korean, French, German, Sinhalese. And it was a beautiful event to see the confidence they had to stand on stage, sing in a language that not everyone in the audience will understand, but they were so actively supported. Like, their fellow peers knew how difficult it is just to stand up on stage to sing in front of such a big audience, let alone in the wider scheme of things in Australia, that overall slightly, Anglo-dominant environment, that you have the courage to do this. The kids themselves were so supportive in their responses. Now, that has come with a lot of, obviously, awareness building and training and mindset change of the society. But to be honest, I will say the kids do a much better job than the teachers. At that event, it was predominantly the children who were highly, highly supportive, regardless of background, whereas I saw only a few staff members around. And so the future is bright, for sure. But I would say to feel that you're empowered by yourself to be yourself, because that symbolic presence is what's required to actually challenge people's assumptions. Now, and I'm assuming in any of the European countries receiving migrants at the moment, we're never talking about one child in the school, right? It's always a small group of them, and that will only grow. And so it does take time, but if you give up your original self and you spend your life trying to be Greek in a Greek school, that's not going to work either. In fact, it's going to backfire later, because you will realize one day you are not Greek, you're not 100% Greek, but you've already lost who you are. And even when the Greeks start to really understand cultural diversity and want to embrace you as part of this multicultural society, you don't actually know what's different about you to a Greek, because you've spent all this time trying to be Greek.
Forgetting who you are. Becoming trying to be somebody else. So
practically that might mean, know what the mainstream music or pop culture and social capital is, but keep your own too. There's no reason why you can't listen to two sets of music and enjoy it. Keep your own practices, festivals, values, language. But of course, you live in the the host country now, if that's Greece, you need to speak the Greek language. You need to understand how the Greek society works. But if you don't stand for who you are, then the dominant society will never shift and will never soften its definition to include you. And that is a journey. Yeah, so that's probably my one piece of advice.
Yeah, and I admire the way you have navigated through and out of this challenge, and now you are in a powerful position to see yourself going through this journey, like look backwards and see what a powerful journey that was, and the way you navigated in this journey is what you are teaching right now.
Yes,
I suppose. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah, and I think among my people of my age, of Asian descent in Australia, this identity crisis of suddenly realizing you're not 100% Australian, but I've lost, is very common. And so I have met so many people who in their adulthood then say, I'm going to go and learn Mandarin. I'm going to take a year off to move to China or Taiwan just to find my roots again. Because now for me, fortunately, this kind of crisis and reflections came very early during university days. And, you know, when you're a university student, you're not worrying too much about careers and finances and everything, the realities of life yet. I was able to devote quite a bit of time to find myself through academic studies at different places, etc. Whereas for a lot of people, this becomes such a heavy midlife interruption that they do end up prioritizing, but it comes at a huge cost mentally, and also financially, etc. And so one of the things I say to my team at school, who are predominantly from a white Anglo background, is that the payoff of the kind of questions I'm asking and the kind of perspectives I'm bringing in, you may not actually see till much later down the track. But I can tell you now that for every migrant, there will be a turning point of crisis if they never felt that they were truly embraced or that they can be who they are in the school context. And so I guess I am hoping that the next generation they will have a small ride on a how do you say it? Maybe a less intense roller coaster ride, not the one like I had.
It's you have this beautiful position, and I think you will play a pivotal role for the schools in Australia and maybe globally. You never know, right? So
hopefully.
The final part of our conversations have touched a lot of chapters, and I think I have so many questions to ask, but we need to come to a close. So in the final phase, you're going to choose one of my books. This is the two. You can either name or just give me the number of the book.
Okay, the fourth one, Becoming Supernatural. That sounds interesting.
Okay. Joe Dispenza. I love Joe Dispenza and the books. So give me one page.
67.
57. 57. 57, yes, and line.
8th line.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to touch from 7. Each time you overcome those automatic habits, your will becomes greater than your program.
Every time. Once more. Every time
each time you overcome those automatic habits, so we all have some automatic habits in our life, your will becomes greater than your program. How does it
a lot. I think it speaks a lot to actually my view of what advocacy is. I think, unfortunately, the word advocacy in many languages come with this, I think, negative connotation that you have to be marching on the streets or creating chaos or doing protests in order to advocate for something. But that's not the case. In fact,
war to bring peace, right? Creating more war.
Or aggression, some sort of fiery aggression is the only way, to solve the problem. Now, for me, I think it's a matter of habit, right? It's a habit change. And it's the fact that I used to feel I need to fit in. So I've developed the habit of talking like an Australian, going along with how the Australian society works, to later on really asking those questions. Because even at the young self, my hair example, there was something that was obviously on the inside I was questioning, right? Why is it like this, etc. And one day, I guess, when you start to challenge these automatic habits of fitting in, agreeing to them, learning how to become Australian, it's one day when you break out of that, I start to go, actually, it doesn't have to be like that as well, because they don't know better. It's not the case that they haven't allowed me necessarily. They've created an environment that implicitly made me feel like that wasn't allowed, but actually, they didn't do that deliberately.
Yes.
At least I firmly believe in Australia, majority of the population is not deliberately racist, deliberately wanting to give you a hard time. They just don't know better. So the more I started to break out of that habit of fitting in and asking challenging questions, bringing this different perspective, the more I saw myself having the will to be an advocate. And that advocacy for me of nudging and just wearing the hat as an advocate, and that's just a label I've given to myself. There's no qualification or license, right? And so I chose to define advocacy by will, not by
accident or
street
by
posters. Yeah. And so I guess that's how that resonates with me, is that, the more I have asked these questions, the more addictive they have become. So the more of a will that I have in wanting to be, to do this work. Yeah.
Yes. So you started with the reflection and the awareness, and then you moved on, and the will comes, and the will follows, and the mind follows. Once you did the programming. Beautiful, beautiful. It was such a lovely conversation. I have so many other questions.
Always,
we will follow up with another podcast. Thank you for accepting the invitation and the challenge to talk about your origin story and yourself.
No, thank you very much for the opportunity and creating such a comfortable environment to share as well. So I do hope that, and I appreciated the last question in particular, because if this is something that is clearly a global trend, you've encouraged me to think, perhaps even outside of my own Australian bubble, what some of these learnings could do for people in other countries as well.
Yeah,
so
exactly, because Australia made 2 steps forward from other countries that needed more, this awareness more right now. Just to do this. Yeah, powerful.
So a great morning. I love conversations, and I love talking. So this podcast has probably gone for much too long, but it's really energized me for the rest of the weekend. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you.